All right, thank you very, very much for inviting me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And in fact, at the moment, I'm very honoured to have Fatima Santiago Sanchez working with us at TATE. She's on loan to me from the Botan Institute, and she and her team, I think, are fantastic. And I didn't hesitate to come today because I feel that creativity is really, if not the most important thing, one of the most important things, not for today and our children, but for tomorrow and all of us. So I've come today to share with you my experiences. I know there's a lot of experience and knowledge in this room, so forgive me if I say things that you do already know, but they're things that I feel passionate about and I feel committed to discussing. I haven't practiced this. Is this the right button? Let's see. I'm actually the Director of Learning for TATE, which means I'm responsible for learning at TATE Modern and at TATE Britain, which is also in London, and at TATE Liverpool and at TATE St Ives. We have 4 TATEs in England. Greedy. But so my responsibility is to ensure strategically that we're all heading in the same direction. And we work across all age groups, but I have to confess to having a particular commitment and passion for our care and development for and with young people. So today I'm just going to share professionally how I've come to where I am and what I'm trying to do, and see if you see similarities in your worlds. And I thought I'd start by asking the question, what is creativity? Because when I first started professionally in this arena, I entered something called Creative Partnerships, which was set up in 2002. And actually, it was called Arts Partnerships. They didn't call it Creative Partnerships, they called it Arts Partnerships. They only called it Creative Partnerships to extend it beyond the arts communities to museums and galleries. So it was a mistake, beautiful mistake. So I arrived, having done quite a lot of reading on creativity, to find that nobody quite knew what on earth we were doing. That in fact people thought we were running arts partnerships, and some people thought we were doing creative partnerships. And so I decided that I should be responsible and read as much as I could to find out what actually creativity was for us in this context with children. And so this is what I came to, and I'll let you read the slide. I'm sure you can all read. But what I felt was, I read so many different things that everybody felt that it was something different, whether it was a personal expression, or whether it was an abstract thought, or whether it was a series of conditions that you had to have, or whether it belonged to genius, or whether it belonged to everybody. And this is what I came to. So this is my understanding of creativity. And I share it with you because these are the things that I think are important. That everybody has the capacity to be creative, everybody. From the day they're born, we are wired up neurologically to make connections, to make diverse and divergent connections. That's what our brain wants to do. It wants to make connections. So we're set up. And that is Tom, who's the son of my friend, who is now he was 3 hours old. And he's ready. He's already ready to take on the world. So creativity for me is about how we learn to create ideas. Ideas for me are at the heart of creativity. You're allowed to disagree, but for me this is what it's about. Then it's about how you make them real in the world. They can't just exist in your head, you have to make them manifest. We have to be able to sense them in some way. And I think that it can be applied to every field. It is not just the arts that are creative. Every subject can be taught creatively and can be creative. It is an endlessly renewable resource. I was thinking about it the other day. It's probably one of the few entirely renewable resources that we have, that we won't have to exploit the earth for and find them not giving anymore. So we contain this incredible renewable resource that costs us nothing except everything in terms of education and making sure we enable young people's creativity to be explored and nurtured. And as I said, everybody can do this. Every single person can and is creative. So I picked up some of these quotes because I think they are kind of similar to what I believe in, or they give a texture to it. And the first one is from Ken Robinson, who I don't know if you know, but he's a very great speaker. And he talks about the very similar things, which is it has to be imaginative. It has to be fashioned or formed or made in some fashion. It has to be produced so that it has a valuable outcome, something that we all believe in, either for the individual or maybe for society. So it can be kind of small and local to the individual, or it can be a huge contribution. And that it needs to have some sort of originality, either for the individual or for the social world it lives in. So that is a quote I mostly agree with, I would say. I think it's quite helpful. Then the other three quotes, I think I chose because they have textures to what I think creativity has about it. So I thought I said this, but Charles Mingus actually said it, that anyone can make the simple complicated. Creativity is making the complicated simple. And what that suggests to me is that it has some sort of discipline to it that enables it not to be chaos, but for it to be quite an elegant and held piece of synthesis. So actually creativity isn't this wild thing that's just fun and mad. It's actually quite a well-disciplined piece of expertise to be creative. Creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. That's Eric Fromm, the third quote down. And I chose that because that really has to be our starting point, that we can no longer go on in our society thinking that what we think is certain. And I think we all live in societies now where that is true. What we thought was real and what we thought was sustainable and what we thought would continue forever cannot. So what are we going to do about that? We cannot go on doing what we do because we will merely get what we get. And lastly, the other Kessler, which is creativity is a type of learning process where the teacher and pupil are located in the same individual. And I think that's very much about us understanding how to learn for ourselves. That the very best of teachers teach us how to teach ourselves, how to ask the questions, how to probe, how to think about things differently. And I was very lucky. I had those kinds of teachers who helped me to see metacognitively, who helped me to see the bigger picture and helped me understand how I was understanding how to get there. It's a fantastic gift to give any individual, the ability to see the big picture and how you relate to it. It's a fantastic gift, and every child should be given that gift. So that's my premise. So what does it look like? If creativity can be anything, it doesn't exist just in art, you know, what on earth does this look like? How can you tell that it's there? Are you really doing it? And I thought I'd just share with you something that I did in 2004 till 6 at this organisation called Creative Partnerships, which I now knew what it was. We did 60 projects, that's a lot of projects, with 30 schools, and we did 180 interviews with teachers, with pupils, and with artists who we work with. So we did work with artists and designers and scientists and philosophers to bring them into the school community to try to spark some difference, some kind of a catalyst for change, we called it. Can we have catalysts for change, and what does it look like? And in all of these projects, these were the common things that we saw. And I suggest you read across. So you have the doing and the showing. And you'll pick up the trace here. It's the same theme going through. What we saw was people identifying problems for themselves, being able to work out what it was, or asking whether something was really true, and saying, can we just test that? Can we have a look at that? So gaps, niches, nooks, crannies, passions, little things you're really, really interested in that you're wondering about. We invited the children and the artists and the scientists to have a pick at it, have a little scratch and see what they saw. And what we saw happening in the showing was that they were able to solve those problems, that they came up with a diversity of different ways of solving a problem. There wasn't one way of solving a problem, there were many ways of solving problems, and there were many ideas to bring to the table. Secondly, what we saw was people thinking differently, using their imaginations and trying to think beyond what they already knew. So they were encouraged to think differently, and what we saw in the showing was new ideas. It's not a surprise, is it? It's not a surprise, but that's what we saw happening, was new ideas for the individual, but also sometimes for the bigger picture. In one of the projects, the 15-year-old students invented a new a technical device for making geodesic domes. So they patented it, you know? So there's 30 kids suddenly patenting a really brilliant idea that's now being sold. It was fantastic. They were actually making stuff. They were actualizing things. It wasn't good enough for them to have the idea. We wanted to see it. Is it possible? Is it feasible? And what we saw was them being able to apply that knowledge directly into the making of an object. That's an incredibly sophisticated thing to do, to actually be able to imagine something that hasn't been there before and make it real. How hard is that? That's the hardest thing on earth. It's what scientists do, and we call it innovation. We go, God, that's incredible. Well, it happens everywhere. It happens in the arts. It happens on a daily basis. We just don't value it in the same way. I saw fascination. I saw children completely absorbed in what they were doing, completely absorbed, and it made them incredibly motivated. So that because it was their idea and they really wanted to do it, they were completely interested in it. Now, somebody said to me once, this is Uber learning. You know, they're like sucking in everything because they are in charge of it. They are the agents of their own learning. It's really exciting. Risk-taking and experimenting. We really encourage them getting things wrong. It's really okay to get things wrong. It is. I asked children once, I did a little mini survey, and it was quite depressing when I asked them in schools what was the most frightening thing they could do, and they said, put up my hand. Frightening thing you can do, because they were so scared of being wrong, and so scared of thinking that they hadn't learned what they were told to learn. That's not a good thing, is it? That's a bad thing. So giving people the space to experiment, get things wrong, take risks, and what we saw was a lot of confidence in the children. In fact, that's the single most apparent thing in all the projects I think I have ever done, and I've done a lot, is the incredible confidence that it instills in not just children but adults too, having a go, trying it, feeling good about yourself, and actually feeling you could do it again. You've exercised that muscle. Sharing knowledge, another crucial aspect to creativity, I think. You don't lock it in a box and hide it. You have to be open and share it with all its failings, and therefore be prepared to be wrong. And what I've noticed about people we call creative geniuses, which I do wonder at, is actually they have very little inhibition. They're quite happy to just try it, make a mistake and get it wrong, because they have faith in themselves that eventually they'll get it right. And in trialing and testing it with people, they'll find that space. So again, in science, if you get one exercise out of 10 experiment accurate, it's considered a success rate. If you get one wrong in the arts, you get shut down. So it's a very different value system. What we saw was they were also using skills and finding new challenges. And that, for me, suggests that there was a stretch happening, that people weren't just chucking children into the deep end and going, swim. They were saying, what do you know? Okay, let's just start stretching that to things you want to know. Let's pull you in. Let's find that hook that's of interest to you. And it would stretch the children so that they want to stretch further. So they came to have that expectation that they should be learning more. They wanted to learn more. So it was a fantastic set of challenge, but not an impossible challenge. And I think that, for me, is another really important thing, that they gained new skills, gained new challenges, and gained a new way of understanding how to meet those. And then what we saw was a refinement of task. You know, the children would be going, no, not yet, not yet, not yet, I haven't quite finished yet. No. And they want to practice it and do it better and get it right. And we as adults know that's important, because we wouldn't write an essay once or write a piece of work and then just shove it off. We would want to make it refined. We would want to go through it and correct it and improve on it and do it better. And again, in my experience of working in the arts, that's very much what you do. You know, artists spend forever doing a piece and then maybe doing it again for the next 30 years. That actually is about refinement of task. It's about really developing that to reach that valued goal. So those were the common features that I saw and continue to see every time we do a project. So my question then is, well, what are the conditions you need to make this happen? So these were the conditions that I actually saw happening. And I wrote them down. Again, I thought I said this, but I didn't say this. It turns out that Tom Bentley and Kimberly Seltzer said this first, or earlier, in 1999. And the common conditions for creativity they saw were trust, freedom of action, variation of context, the right balance between skills and challenges, which I just discussed, interactive exchange of ideas, and real-world outcomes. I think there are other things too, but it's very interesting because when you look at that, it's very hard to see the school in that. It's very hard to see the school day in that, isn't it? You know, that's one of the things I find really difficult is, okay, if these are the conditions, how do we make this happen? Because our systems and structures aren't designed for this. You know, the systems and structures that were born out of the Enlightenment and lecterns and Rose. So it often seems a bit of a paradox or a complication about how we make this happen, but I think it can. There are a few things missing from this slide, which is what is the input for these creative conditions? What actually do you have to put into an environment, apart from these things, that help create the culture for creativity to thrive? And we found these to be the quality of the idea put in. So it doesn't matter whose idea, and the scale of the idea, the ambition of the idea seems very important. The second thing is the quality of the materials that you put in. So really rubbish quality materials, you know, paper plates and doilies, not very good. Beautiful, I saw once a music session where they made rosewood claves. They only make them in one place in Germany for children, the rosewood handmade claves, and the child plays them. She went, oh, this sounds like music. It normally sounds like wood being hit together. And it was. So the quality of the material really matters. The environment really matters. I've never seen anyone go into a school in projects that I've been part of and either take the children out of the classroom, problem, or change the classroom around in some way. So they kind of remove or disrupt the linear setup of a classroom. And the feel for the environment. There's often, I don't think in any of this presentation I've got the word laughter, but I should, because laughter and fun are really quite high up there on what's important, that kind of energy and sense of joy that children do have, but really easy to knock them out of it. So really important. And then the last thing was language, both the quality of the language we use with children, so we speak with them, not at them and to them, but with them, but also about how you use language in context. So it's not a problem to talk about perspective if you're doing work on perspective and you're talking about proportionality and distance and how you... It's not a problem to actually use complex words. So you do not have to dumb down. We have to think up and meet the vision of our children. So what did we find? Is it worth finding? Is it worth doing? These were our findings. And these were just the ones I could fit on the page. So there were many, many more. So I worked with 30 schools, and pretty much in all instances, we had an increase in the children's confidence and in the teachers' confidence, I might say too, because, you know, we all know that teachers get very limited opportunities to really invest in some of these ideas and take time to know and be, enjoy them themselves. Increased attendance, children just came in more. We have quite a problem in England with some young people who are very disenfranchised and very disengaged with education, and they were the children mostly who started to come to school, who hadn't for a long time, so that was quite significant. We had an increased responsibility from the kids. They actually felt like they were, you know, they needed to be decent, they needed to take charge of things, and they were responsible for their own actions. That's a fantastic life skill. We all need that. We had increased motivation, so people wanted to learn, they'd come in earlier, they'd stay through breaks, they didn't want to stop, we had to stop them. Increased empathy, being able to sense how other people feel, being able to talk it through, incredibly important. Improved trust and teamwork, what business tells us they want every half hour, quite frankly, that actually good team working skills and good, and the ability to work in teams and things, really, really very important. They had language development, and in the area I worked, it was so significant, we worked with Shirley Bryce Heath, that all the schools in Kent decided that in their early years programme they would implement this because they saw such a transformation in particularly young boys' oracy. So it was a very significant moment. They gained new skills. They gained new knowledge. They had a better sort of metacognitive understanding. They had a better idea of their own strategies for learning and how they learned. They had independent critical thinking, and in fact, somebody once said, these children are very, very pushy, asking questions. They're very, very questioning children. And I had to say, is that a bad thing, children asking questions? Hands up. I think it's good. Increase the ability to apply knowledge across all subjects. They all demonstrated the skill not to just remain in their own area, but they were able to transfer what they'd learned into other subjects. So, for example, the single most significant change when we saw in our particular area of doing the arts was that their maths improved. That was the first thing to improve. And I'm not doing this so that children's math does improve, but it did happen to. Because, as you'd expect, they were talking about distance, perspective, measurements. They were talking about the concepts behind maths and not just the doingness of it. And it made a difference to them. And it did, across the piece in these 30 schools, improve their academic attainments for the schools across every school. And I did put that forward, actually, to the government at the time. And I said, it's doing something quite amazing. And they said, yeah, don't tell everybody, or we'll have to do this in every school. So that's the ambition. That's the challenge. So I think you know why I think it's so important. But if there's any doubt, I thought maybe we could just go through what some of those things might be. So there's a bigger picture here. We live in a rapidly changing world that requires us to think and behave differently. We depend on new ideas and innovation to take us forward personally, socially, economically, and environmentally. We are in some of the most difficult times that we've ever known. That probably gets said every 50 years. But we are in very difficult times, and if we do what we do, we will get what we get. So we have to do things differently if we want to get things differently. And my feeling is that it's absolutely fundamental that we encourage our children to start thinking differently so that they can do things differently. And I think we need to take responsibility for doing that too. So I thought it might just be worth talking a little bit about, if I've said that creativity can be done by anyone in any subject, which I do totally believe, is there something special about art? Do we have a special relationship with creativity? And my answer to that is, I think we can. We don't have to, but I think we can, because I do think that art has certain aspects to it that invite creativity. For a start, art is meant to be generative, so it already has a very good starting point. But these are the special conditions that I think that art might and can have. There's a cautionary note to this, because it doesn't always have to, but it can have this. And the first of these is that art is about making abstract ideas manifest. It's that very thing in the creativity which is thinking imaginatively and then being able to apply it. You can't just think it, it has to exist and be sensed in the world. And that is primarily what art does. It invites children to exercise their imaginative muscles of things that don't yet exist, that haven't been thought of, that are in their minds, and make them manifest on a page. Or in 3D, even more complex, or in poetry, or as a song, or. So it's about how you go about making the abstract manifest. And because art is meant to do that, and in the doing of making art, one does that, it can have a special relationship with creativity. And also, not just in making art, but also in looking at or experiencing art, one can have those, one does the other end of that, which is receiving and understanding how those abstract ideas were made manifest. And I spoke to a colleague in America, and she said, you get a double yield with art. You get the thing itself, and you get the ideas behind it. You know, and you can ask questions about both of those things and how they interrelate. So the materiality is really, really fascinating as an object, and the ideas that got it there are really, really interesting. The second thing is that art has to exist in the social world. You know, you can't hide art in a cupboard. Well, you can, and maybe sometimes we should. But actually, unless art is in the social world, it cannot be seen. So it has to exist in the social realm. And that's very important. And I think that is slightly different from some other subjects. For example, in the sciences, they are often done, experiments are often done quite privately and behind closed doors. And because art is so public, we have a lot of public opinion about it, which often might be a little less discerning than some of the other voices that get had across other subjects. But it exists in the social world, and I think that's really important. And partly because so many people do engage with it. And thirdly, arts deliberately seek to engage with the emotions. And I know that actually Fatima and her team probably know much more about this than me, so I'll leave it to them later. But this, I suppose, is what Fatima calls responsible education, which is actually the arts are deliberately trying to engage with your emotions. They deliberately set out to connect to feeling, to love, to empathy, to sorrow, to heartbreak. You know, all the things that we associate, or to the disconnected, to the cool, you know, but they're actively trying to play with how we feel about things. Art also actively creates new symbol systems, and particularly in the world I work in, where new and contemporary art sometimes appears to be there to just baffle people. But in fact, what's happening is they're creating new symbol systems. They're taking things from other systems and bringing them together. And so we don't quite understand them because we've never seen them before. But again, that is part and parcel of us actually trying to build this language about learning what we don't know to what we do know. So we have to both do that, and we have to both do that as receivers and lookers. We have to go from what we don't know to what we do know. It's learning. And lastly, artists are, as professionals, I consider to be professional creative learners. Not all of them. Some of them I wouldn't really want to let anywhere near children or a school. But many of them are what I would call professional creative learners, in that they show all the features of creativity, in that they are asking a question, they're researching it, they're using their imaginations, they're thinking different about it, their objective is to be original, they have to create a valued goal, which is often an exhibition, and they're having to fashion that in an original manner. So they're showing all the conditions of creativity, and those that really understand the process really take it further. So I often find it, when you find the right people who are creative practitioners to work with, and again, it doesn't have to be in the arts, but those that do exhibit these signs that reflect creativity itself, it's no surprise, therefore, that they're so great at communicating that to the children involved. But it doesn't have to be special. And anything that doesn't demand that they think for themselves and they apply their ideas, that doesn't really use their creative muscles, is really not very special. And I've sat in a lot of that too, where actually you go, you know, this really shouldn't be, this is just activity. There is no learning going on here, and it certainly isn't creative. So it doesn't have to be a special relationship in the arts, but the arts offer such a fertile ground. It's the easy step. It's inviting all the things in it. So they're a great way to use it. And they also demand that we talk together in the arts, that we discuss things, that we share ideas, and learning how to do that with respect and decency is a really, really fundamental part of making art, I think, and talking about art with children, which takes me on to the third part. We are moving through. There are 4 parts. So what's love got to do with this? You know, and I know that people, well, maybe not yourselves, but I've certainly come into contact when I talk about emotional intelligence. People say, oh yeah, crying at anything at all times. And I go, no, the exact opposite. Knowing how to manage your emotions is fundamental to learning. Learning is an emotional experience. Your brain is connected to your emotions. You cannot have a non-emotional experience. So learning is really emotional. And just like if you have a bad tooth, it's really hard to focus and learn. You know, having unhappy and bad hearts, you know, makes it really difficult to learn, if not for some children, impossible. So the emotional state and well-being of children and adults is really crucial. and we have to invest in that. We have to know that we are doing better for children. I think the World Health Authority suggests that England has some of the most unhappy children in the world, which is really very sad to hear. But I think that's partly because we also tend not to value education with the same joy as maybe some other places. So this is what I think the emotions have to do. And I had for a while worked quite a bit on emotional intelligence, but I'm going to take a little bit from Erich Fromm today. Because if creativity is generative emotionally, I think it does it in these ways. And these are all things that I've said before, that it generates confidence in people. It generates happiness. There's a lot of laughter and a bit of mucking about that goes on, which I'm a great fan of. I don't think there's quite enough mucking about. Purposeful mucking about, I think, is quite important. Respect. You know, there's a lot of respect that's generated through doing this work. There's a huge amount of empathy. In fact, one of the things that the children that I worked with recently said was they understood how it felt to be the teacher, that's quite a big thing, because they realised that actually, if they were being invited to take moments, it was really annoying if everybody was talking, or if they had an idea and they were trying to share it and everybody was, you know, shouting, they couldn't be heard, or so it actually it changed their behaviours, taking on a responsibility and actually understanding a bit more about what a teacher's role might be. Really interesting. That actually knowledge is going through this, and that's a deeply profound emotional thing. And we often teach for knowledge rather than teaching for learning, which was my preferred option, because you can get knowledge from most places. But actually, gaining knowledge is a deeply satisfying experience and makes us feel positive, and being able to apply it is even more fantastic. Taking responsibility, again, I've talked about that. Valuing others. And I think that this actually in the arts is a very big thing, because so much of it has to work in teams, particularly if you're doing dance or drama or music. Visual arts, often not so much so, but we try to get people talking. I remember once trying to get a group. I did drama as my early option, and I had a group of children who actually couldn't stand in a circle without trying to kill each other. And it used to take about 20 minutes just to get people to stand in a circle. And I remember the day that they all stood in a circle and thinking, wow, you know, we've arrived at respect. So they're little things, but they're huge. So valuing others, and I think it's also about a sense of generosity, about giving things away, about not having to have it all for yourself, that actually giving it to other people, you do have it for yourself, and then you have some more on top. So it's about our understanding of how we want to share amongst ourselves, which is not currently the way we go about things. We do things as things that we win and that we gain from alone, and I think we need to shift that. So I use something from Erich Fromm. Do you know Erich Fromm's work? Yeah, you probably know it better than I do, quite frankly. But there he is in the corner, and I just did that. Oh, he really looks nice too. I'd like to have a conversation with him. What I really love about this is that it treats love with the respect that I think love needs. So love isn't some romanticized, weepy novel written badly. It's about care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. And I really can buy into that. I think that those are exactly the things I see happening when people do creative projects. So I think love is deeply part of this. And that self-love is not about being selfish. It's about understanding one's own emotions and sense of being. And I think that's incredibly important too. And he says, if one accepts this view, love is a skill that can be learned. So I've got a theme going on here, haven't I? I think things can be learned. I think our life is about learning, fundamentally. It's what we're set up to do. So if that's the emotional part, and I know that there'll be more on that this afternoon, and I know that the first report that the Botany Institute was part of that, and there's a lot of exciting work going on in that area. My other question is, what's money got to do with this then? You know, one of the main questions I got from politicians when I was doing this was, so how will it change the economy tomorrow? And I had to say, well, it probably won't tomorrow. But these are the ideas that came from it that I thought might be worth sharing with you, because I think there's been a bit of a shift since these ideas were current in 2002. I think our position has changed globally on actually what the currency of currency is. So, these were the economic arguments for creativity. So I thought it might be helpful to define it, just in case we're all going, what is it? What is it? So inherently, the economy suggests some sense of capital to it, wealth production and resources. So that's what is at the heart of that. And Richard Florida very famously wrote The Rise of the Creative Class. I've just forgotten what his new book's called because he did a response to it. But what it talked about, and its argument was that the most creative cities, the most creative schools, towns, cities, would be places where people came to be because 30% and growing of our population work in the creative industries. And that's certainly true in England, that 30% of our population work in what is broadly termed the creative industries. And it is still the only part of our industry that still, one of the only parts of the industry that still has some growth. It's small, but apparently it still has some growth according to the Skills Council. So Richard Florida was very much talking about the fact that not only was it good for all these other things, but he, as an economist, felt that actually there was economic benefit in the creativity argument, that we would all gain from this because this is how cities would thrive and others would die if we didn't pursue the kind of creative trajectory. And there are some more economic arguments. So Ken Robinson also makes them in his book, Out of Our Mind in particular. And he says in 1988, the government estimated that the creative industries had generated annual revenues of 60 billion, a tenfold increase in 10 years. So there's a real trajectory that actually creativity was creating creative people, and they were starting to generate this incredible economy for the country. And Tom Bentley and Kimberly Seltze also say, for the first time in history, knowledge is a primary source of economic productivity, as it still is. So we are no longer, the workforce that we were working in industrial industries. Learners and workers must draw on their entire spectrum of learning experiences and apply what they've learned in new creative ways. It's innovation. And we've always had a very big sense of innovation in England. That was always something quite important to us from the industrial era onwards, that actually innovation is about progress and development and the economy. So I don't think it's possible to talk about any of these things really without talking about them all, because the social is aligned to the economic, and the personal is assigned to the social, and the social to the economic. You can't get around it. And there's a really very brilliant essay that I read recently by Felix Guattari called Les Trois Écologies, the Three Ecologies. And it's he's a French philosopher and psychoanalyst, but he relates how we need to personally activate, to socially kind of unite, and to then develop in our kind of new technologies and social mechanisms. So it's a very really well thought through argument that says we're in this situation, how do we work our way through it? And creativity and learning is kind of his solution. These were the arguments that were made, and they were convincing. In my time when we were doing creative partnerships, this was very much part of why the government was doing this program, because they wanted to develop on an economic basis. And here are some more economic arguments, but they start for me to get quite problematic, and the economic argument is quite problematic because in a way we should be doing this for children regardless. However, what they say, John Reed says, who's actually the person who does the Reed employment agencies, and he says in the new creative economy, more than ever before, it will be people and not capital that make the difference. And I go, ooh, I thought people were capital. I thought that's what the basis was. So I kind of wonder then what our expectations are of people. Will we be forcing people to work harder and more and harder? Just push more on what we've already done. You just keep doing it louder and harder and more hours. Is that the solution? Doesn't seem to be, does it? Because we are actually doing that right now. And so we're going to have to unpick that circle and maybe start to think differently about it. And then eventually I got to a point where I came to start reading about the economy of the mind. And in fact, there is the neuroeconomy. I didn't know that. Did you know that? There's a study on the neuroeconomy, so the economy of your neurons. So that actually developing your brain and how we develop our learning has become an economic focus. So can you develop in certain ways that would be most beneficial to the economy? Don't know whether to be scared by that. I think I might be a bit. So, our future is in their minds. And I just wanted to recount a couple of things here that I think are quite important. What I've realized in doing this journey is that actually what I do now in the TATE is based on all of these things that I have learned. And what I'm trying to do now is find ways of creating conditions where we can optimize creative potential for anyone who comes to the TATE, and particularly to the young children, which has meant rethinking all our spaces, rethinking the program that we offer and how we go about it, rethinking how we speak with children and with adults, and rethinking how we disperse our economic wealth, how we rethink it, how we crowdsource, how we reflect back on what all those things might mean to us in terms of creativity in children. I read recently a really nice quote, well, it's not very nice, but it's quite a salient quote from Gilles Deleuze, whose quote is, "We treat prisoners like children and children like prisoners." And I kind of recognize that. And I don't think any of us want to do that. None of us got engaged with education to do that, ever. But the system and the structures are kind of in place that kind of force us into this position. And so we cannot be responsible, or I feel really passionate that I cannot be responsible for continuing that. I have to make some sort of intervention somewhere that enables us to break that cycle. So we try to work with teachers, and we do a lot of CPD with teachers, and we try to offer summer schools. And now we have a studio which I'm giving to schools that want to use it, who don't have the resources, so that we can have a shared and common approach to how we try to work with the ideas of creativity and how we make them possible for children. Because I really feel I don't, and we don't want to be responsible for making children the prisoners of their own minds. And on that note, I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to thank you for doing a lot of listening. I'm sorry, I know I speak really fast. But if you have any questions, we do have time. Thank you.